A man comes home without the garlic his wife asked him to buy. That is all. One forgotten packet. And suddenly she is shouting, in a kitchen that has gone very quiet, about everything except garlic. Months of swallowed disappointments, birthdays half remembered, evenings lost to his phone, all of it detonating over one small thing. Later she sits alone on the edge of the bed and wonders what happened to her. Here is what happened. Nothing about tonight. A pressure that had been quietly building for months finally found a crack. And the strangest part is that she never decided any of it. A story inside her did. This is The Heart of Emotional Agility by Susan David, a clinical psychologist. Her claim is simple. You do not react to events, you react to the stories your mind spins about events and to the emotions those stories create. Get hooked by the story and it quietly runs your life. Learn to step back from it and you finally get to choose. And further in, the coping habit that feels like healing but quietly keeps the wound open. Start with the machine behind everything. Your brain is a story factory. It takes raw events, a short reply from a colleague, a missed call, a look on the face of your boss, and instantly wraps them in a narrative that explains what they mean. He is annoyed with me, I am being sidelined, I always ruin things. The story arrives so fast and feels so true that you never notice it is a story at all. And the feeling of truth comes from emotion. Emotions evolved to move your body before your mind could argue. Racing heart, sweaty palms, a wash of dread. So whatever story arrives wearing an emotion gets treated as fact. But the factory makes mistakes, and its oldest products last a lifetime. A schoolboy fails a test he never studied for, reads the disappointment of his parents as hatred of failure, and quietly concludes that failing makes him unlovable. 20 years later, he is a manager who cannot take a risk, afraid of a boss who was never angry, living by a story written by a 12-year-old. Watch yourself this week and you will catch the factory running. The flash of anger when a driver cuts you off, he did that deliberately. The sting when a message goes unanswered, she is ignoring me. None of these are observations. They are drafts, written in milliseconds, by a machine that prefers speed over truth. If seeing that machine clearly is worth something to you, subscribe. There is a new book broken down every week. Because the real damage begins with what we do next, the two ways almost everyone handles a painful story, and why both of them fail. When a painful emotion arrives, most people reach for one of two strategies. Susan David calls them bottling and brooding, and she is blunt that both make things worse. Bottlers push the feeling down. They believe emotions are weakness, so they clench their jaw, change the subject, and soldier on. It works, briefly, but a pushed-down emotion does not leave. It compounds like interest on a debt you refuse to look at, until it detonates over something absurdly small. A forgotten packet of garlic, for instance. Our kitchen scene was not an overreaction to tonight. It was months of bottled hurt finding its crack. And bottling has a second cost. Emotions carry information. The frustration you keep suppressing about your dead-end job is the very signal that could push you toward better work. Silence the messenger, and you lose the message. Brooders do the opposite. They replay the wound on a loop, the insult, the failure, the unfairness, convinced that thinking about it one more time counts as dealing with it. It does not. Rumination is pain on repeat. Each replay deepens the groove, crowds out the rest of life, and moves nothing forward. Brooding feels like processing. And that disguise is exactly what makes it dangerous. One strategy buries the feeling alive. The other keeps it on stage forever. What actually works is a third path. And it starts with something almost insultingly simple: finding the right words. The first real step of emotional agility is labeling, describing what you feel in honest, specific language. Not the vague fog of "I am stressed" or "I am fine." The precise truth: "I am ashamed. I am envious of the promotion my colleague just got. I am afraid this project will expose me." Precision matters because a named emotion becomes an object you can look at. Instead of a fog, you are lost inside. Psychologists find that people who can tell the difference between frustration, disappointment, and resentment handle all three better than people who file everything under stress. Vague words are also hiding places. Saying "I wish things had gone differently" costs nothing. Saying "I have carried shame for 20 years about dropping out of college" that names the actual wound, and only named wounds can be treated. In practice, try one exchange this evening. When the day replays and your mind offers its usual summary, tired, fine, stressed, stop and ask, what is the accurate word? Angry at whom? Afraid of what? Hurt by which sentence? The first honest label often lands with a small shock of relief, like finding the splinter after a day of vague pain. And the moment a feeling has a name, something else becomes possible. You can decide how to treat it, which is where most people turn cruel. Here is the step that sounds soft and is actually the hinge of the whole method. Once you have named the feeling, allow it to exist without punishing yourself for having it. The test Susan David gives is beautifully simple. Speak to yourself the way you would speak to a struggling friend or to a child you love. Because notice what you do now. A friend admits she is jealous of her sister, and you respond with warmth and understanding. You catch yourself feeling the same thing, and the inner voice turns vicious. What is wrong with you? Grow up. That viciousness does not make the jealousy leave. It just adds shame on top, and shamed feelings go underground, where they run things from the dark. Acceptance is not approval, and it is not surrender. It is accuracy. You feel what you feel, and the feeling is allowed to be there while you decide what to do. The regret about the abandoned degree stops being proof that you are a failure and becomes an honest ache that can finally do its job, pointing at what still matters to you. Learning, growth, making your family proud. An accepted emotion returns to its evolutionary purpose, a messenger with information, not a verdict on your worth. And once the message is received, you need one more move, the step back that changes everything. Here is the sentence at the center of the book. You have emotions. You are not your emotions. There is a difference between "I am angry," which fuses you to the feeling, and "I notice I am feeling anger," which puts one step of daylight between you and it. That one step is where choice lives. From that step back, two things become visible. First, the story behind the feeling is just one draft of events. The driver who cut you off becomes a man who probably never saw you, and the anger deflates on its own. Second, every emotion is weather. It arrives, it peaks, it passes. Sadness tonight is not the truth about your life. It is the weather at 9 p.m., and weather always moves. David offers two everyday tools for building this perspective. Mindfulness, which is simply paying full attention on purpose to your breath, your senses, the actual room you are in, so you catch the mind drafting its stories in real time. And journaling, writing honestly about what you felt and why, which drags the fog of the night into daylight where its size can be measured. A few quiet minutes of either, most days, slowly turns the observer from a visitor into a resident. In practice, the shift sounds small and changes everything. "I am a failure" becomes "I am having the thought that I am a failure." The thought loses its teeth the moment it is held out at a distance, which frees you for the real question. If the old stories no longer steer, what should? With the noise turned down, David turns to what belongs at the wheel: your values. Not goals, values. A goal is a finish line. Get the promotion, buy the house. A value is a direction you never finish walking: honesty, growth, being present for the people you love. Her uncomfortable observation is that most people have never actually chosen theirs. They inherited them. The career that would impress their parents, the lifestyle their college friends measure each other by, the version of family their relatives enforce. You can win at borrowed values for decades and wake up empty because the scoreboard was never yours. So she suggests quiet questions, asked honestly. What would you pursue if nobody was watching and nothing could go wrong? At the end of an ordinary day, which hour felt genuinely worth living and which felt like performance? What would the person you hope to become think of the things you chased this year? The answers sketch your actual values, and they are often embarrassingly different from the life currently on the calendar. In practice, values turn into forks in the road. A quiet evening arrives, and the phone offers its endless scroll, while the half-written business plan waits in a drawer. Growth or comfort? Two invitations land for the same Saturday. The networking event that photographs well, or the friend who actually needs you. Each small fork walk toward a value strengthens it, the way a path deepens with use. But knowing the direction is not the same as walking it, and the last idea is about how walking actually happens. Living by your values does not happen through one dramatic reinvention. David is emphatic here. It happens through small, deliberate choices, repeated until they become automatic, and through environments designed so the right choice is the easy one. Small beats big for a precise reason. Grand transformations carry grand stakes, and grand stakes summon the old emotions, fear of failure, shame at slipping, which is exactly the weather that blows people back into old patterns. A goal small enough that failure costs little slides under the fear. Nobody relapses over 10 minutes of reading, and each small win quietly rewrites the oldest story of all, from I cannot change into apparently I can. Then, tilt the ground. If mornings should start with journaling instead of scrolling, the journal sleeps on the pillow beside you and the phone sleeps in another room. If the value is health, fruit sits at eye level and the biscuits live on a shelf that needs a chair. You can also splice a value onto a routine that already runs, while the morning coffee brews one caring line to someone you love. Same trigger, better carb. One warning. Routines exist so the brain can stop paying attention, and mindless is exactly where old stories retake the wheel. So audit the autopilot now and then. Ask whether the routine still serves the value, or whether you now serve the routine. Hold all 7 of these ideas together and they form one movement. Notice the story, name the feeling, allow it, step back, choose the direction, take the small step. And yet intelligent, motivated people wreck this method every day in 3 predictable ways. First, forced positivity is bottling with better branding. Good vibes only sounds like health, and it is repression in a brighter shirt. When you refuse every difficult feeling, you also refuse its information, and you teach the people around you to bring you comfortable lies. The goal was never to feel good all day. It is to be accurate, and accuracy sometimes hurts. Second, processing can become the disguise that wallowing wears. Journaling that only relives the event, conversations that circle the same wound, therapy language used to keep the story alive rather than to loosen it. The test is direction. Real processing moves toward a label, an acceptance, a decision. If the 10th retelling looks exactly like the first, it is not processing. It is brooding with a notebook. Third, the sunk cost story keeps people loyal to lives they have outgrown. I have given this career 12 years. I cannot waste them. But the years are spent either way. The only real question is about the years ahead and what staying will cost. Guarding a dead investment with living time is the most expensive loyalty there is. This one deserves its own scene, and it is waiting in the application. Run the 4 steps on something real. Pick the feeling that has been visiting you all week. Name it precisely out loud or on paper: envy, dread, resentment, hurt. Allow it. In the tone you would use with a friend. Of course you feel this, given the story you have been carrying. Step back, I notice I am feeling this, and ask what one-sided story is feeding it. Then choose, not the reaction the feeling demands, but the response your values suggest. 10 minutes, honestly done, will show you the method from the inside. And if what you feel is genuinely unmanageable, heavy enough to darken every day, then getting professional support is not a failure of this method. It is the method, values choosing wisely. Now the 2 lives this plays out in. Here is a concrete example. Imagine two capable professionals who each receive the same brutal performance review. The first gets hooked. The old story, "I am not good enough," floods in, and she swings between its two failed answers, brooding through sleepless replays of every sentence, then bottling it at work behind a bright, brittle smile. Within months, she is avoiding every stretch assignment, protecting herself from a verdict she has already accepted. The second feels the identical sting and names it: shame and fear of being found inadequate. She lets the feeling exist without turning it into a self, notices the story underneath, steps back far enough to read the review as information, two skills to build, one blind spot to watch. Then she chooses value first, growth over comfort, and books the training she has avoided for a year. Same event, same initial pain. One life narrowed by the story mentioned at the start, the habit that feels like healing but keeps the wound open. One life widened because the space between feeling and action was used. Here is the contrasting example from the sunk cost trap. Imagine a professional 12 years into a prestigious career that stopped feeling like his own somewhere around year 7. The story says the years would be wasted. The values audit says otherwise. What he actually treasures is teaching, mentoring, watching people grow. So he refuses the dramatic gesture. No resignation letter on the desk. Instead, tiny moves. One mentoring session a week, an evening course in instructional design, journal on the pillow, phone in the hall, a conversation with his manager about leading the training for his team. 2 years later, his job description has quietly bent toward his values, without a single burned bridge. The past stayed spent either way, and the future finally came back under his control. The pattern in both stories is the same. The feeling is allowed in, the story is held out at a distance, and the next small step is chosen by a value, not a mood. First, you react to stories, not events. When a feeling floods in, ask what draft your mind just wrote, and whether it is the only version. Second, name it, allow it, step back. A precisely labeled emotion, treated with the kindness you would give a friend, viewed from one step away, turns from a command into information. Third, let values steer in tiny steps. Choose your own scoreboard, then walk toward it through choices small enough to survive fear, in rooms arranged to make the right choice easy. Emotional agility, in the end, is the quiet skill under every other skill. Not feeling less, feeling accurately. Not silencing the storyteller, just declining to hand it the wheel. The gap between what happens to you and what you do next is small, but everything you care about lives inside it, and it widens with practice. And if the story you most need distance from is the one that keeps sabotaging your own plans, the breakdown of The Mountain Is You is on the channel, and it maps exactly how self-sabotage works and how to dismantle it. If you want the PDF notes used to break down this book, comment PDF below. When I see your comment, I will share the link so you can go through every key idea yourself. And tell me in the comments which book you want decoded next. Your comment might decide the next video. This is Blood, Sweat, Gold, where luxury is earned, not inherited.